Then the next time we went to Europe was in about 1969. 62.
With Michael, right?
It was 62, and we took our two older children, Michael and Christy, who were 10 and 11, and the plan had been that we were going to go on the France, which was a new ship, and we were going to go in cabin class on the France, which was the least expensive ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to France, we were going to have a tiny little car and drive around. And so, in order to get ready for this, we did a lot of studying and teaching them everything, and I made a notebook of all the things we were going to see. And then we packed carefully. We each had a little tiny bag, like a little golf bag, and each of us had a change of underwear and an extra pair of shoes and a bathing suit and a pajamas and a raincoat. I bought the raincoat at the Fell store in Winnetka, and they didn't have them for children, and I never really saw them because they were in envelopes, packed in an envelope.
Yeah.
So we each had an envelope for emergency in our bag, which would open up into a raincoat. And so off we went to New York to get ready to go on the France on this trip.
Mm-hmm.
Your grandfather had to go to Washington on some sort of medical business, so he wore a suit to Washington, and which he was going to leave in New York and send home, and he met us in New York. So that night we were going to stay in New York for 2 days,
mm-hmm.
take them to the Automat, things like that, Statue of Liberty, and things like that. So that night we decided we would take them in the dark down to the pier to see the ocean liner we were sailing on for the first time. And so in the dark, in a taxi cab, we get down to the special place at the pier where the French line ship would be, and there was nothing there. And we were supposed to leave in 2 days. And so we asked a guard, where is the France, the ship we were going on? And he said that there was a strike, and if the France was still in France. And we said, when is it going to be here? And he said he didn't know. So that was a little upsetting. So we went back. So we said, well, come on, walk along the pier and see some other big boats. So they were very unhappy. Michael was crying, I think, and Christy was sucking her thumb, and Dad was saying, what are we going to do now? And so
all you do is your raincoats and your packets.
We walked along the pier, and we came to the Cunard line, which has the English ships,
mm-hmm.
and there was the Queen Elizabeth. And it was all decked out they were having a party, and there was music playing, and the whole thing was strung with light bulbs. The whole ship was strung with, light bulbs. It was late at night. It was just beautiful. And there were people on the decks dancing, and they were all in their white dinner jackets, and it was very exciting. And we said to someone, what's happening here? And they said, Eisenhower, who'd just been President Eisenhower is leaving on the ship tomorrow to go back to Europe for the first time since he was President of the United States. He hasn't been back there since the war, back to the European theater. Mm-hmm. And we said, oh my, and we watched for a while. And then we went back to our sad one-room hotel room, and I washed those clothes. And we only had one set up, hung them up to dry, and we went to bed, all of us in the same room. And then in the morning, we got dressed, and it was raining outside.
Raincoats?
We put on the raincoats, and as I went out the door, I caught my pocket, as I often do on a doorknob, because I'm just that height, and I ripped the whole side of my raincoat. And the two children put on their raincoats, and they went down to their ankles, and there was no junior size. And we went down to the lobby of the hotel and get some breakfast, and then Grandpa went and got in a telephone booth and called the French line and said, when is the boat coming? And they said, we don't know, it may be weeks, they're on strike. And so then he called Cunard and said, do you have any ships going out? And they said, all we have is the Elizabeth, and it's leaving today. And he said, can we get passage? And they said, It's totally booked. But we have one cancellation. We have a suite on the Elizabeth, but you'd have to be over here within an hour and a half. And so Grandpa stuck his head out of the phone booth and said, we could have a suite on the Elizabeth. It's going to cost us a lot of money, but what do you say, let's go? And I said, I can't go. All I have is a seersucker skirt and a bathing suit and a ripped raincoat. And he said, oh, we'll buy things on the ship. And I said, well, I can't buy an evening dress on the ship. And he said, well, I can't. I've got a suit, and I'll just buy a bow tie, and that'll be good enough. So anyway, off we went with carrying our bags in our ripped raincoats in the rain down to the first class gangplank. Oh no! First we get to the
boat,
to the dock.
Yeah.
And we traveled enough so that we knew that you put your suitcases on the moving platform. So we started to put our 4 little bags on the platform, and they said, oh, sorry, it's too late. The ship has already been loaded.
Oh,
you have to carry your baggage on board. Well, like steerage people in the 1920s. And so carrying our bags and with our ripped clothes and wet hair, we go down to the first class gangplank, which of course is different than any of the others because it had sort of a sisal rug going up and gardenias coming down, and the crew all dressed in their fancy outfits standing up. And so we started to march up the gangplank, and they said, excuse us, this is the first class gangplank. And we said, and Grandpa held up our tickets showing that we were in a suite. And they said, oh, excuse me, and they let us on. So we got on the ship, and we started going. First we found our quarters, which were splendid. And then Christy started looking around and she came running back in and said, Mom and Dad, there are people have a suite next door to us, and they have stolen the curtains from the ship. And they're wearing the curtains. They are people who have stolen and are wearing the curtains from the ship. And so Grandpa looked out the door to see who was in the hall. Well, it was the Nigerian Parliament who were living next door to us in their robes. So in the meantime, I was sent on to go to the dining room steward because in most of the grand ships in those days, there were 2 sittings for meals, the first sitting and the second sitting. First sitting was early, and people usually took their children to the first sitting.
Yeah. And
second sitting, people all dressed in black tie, and it was a more elaborate and lengthier meal. And it was the glamorous sitting.
Yeah.
So as I left, of course, Grandpa said, for heaven's sake, explain and get us in the first sitting. So I went down to the dining room where the dining room steward sits at a big table and has a plan of the dining room and all the little cards going in all the little tables of where people were sitting. And first thing I said was, I'm here to find places for my family, and we'd like to sit. It's very important that we have first sitting. And he said, sorry, on the Elizabeth there is only one sitting.
Oh.
So there we were. So I said, well, please, I'd like some, just off on the side somewhere, a little side, we don't want to really be noticed. And he said, well, and he kept looking around the main dining room at all his little cards and all his little places. He could find a table for us. Well, adjacent to this large dining room was a small alcove. And I thought, well, there are empty tables in there. And I said, I'd like to be in that alcove. And he said, no, I'm sorry. And he kept trying to put me in this room, but there was no place for us. So finally he said, well, I guess we'll put you in the alcove. And I said, thank you, that's much better, because we really don't want to be seen.